And it looks like Joe Flacco was very, very blunt when it came to Shedeur Sanders and what he could be in a situation with Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland. This thing is making waves. We have to get into it. Welcome to Keep the Vision. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share the channel, hit that bell notification, hype the video. That'd be greatly appreciated. Let's get right into things here. This is courtesy of heavy.com. It says Joe Flacco gives blunt take on playing with Browns quarterback Shedeur Sanders. Okay. Here it says the 41-year-old quarterback will be entering.
Some off-the-field talk about Shedeur Sanders just turned into a real conversation about power, patience, and who actually controls his future in Cleveland. That single detail is enough to make Browns fans stop scrolling. Because for months, everything around Shedeur Sanders has felt like a story written in headlines before it was ever lived out on the field. And now, one of the league's most respected veteran arms has finally given his honest take on what it was actually like sharing a quarterback room with him. No filter, no spin, just the truth from someone who has lived through 15 different quarterback rooms in 15 different seasons, watching young players rise and fall under exactly this kind of pressure. This is the story of a rookie who didn't just walk into an NFL building. He walked into a war zone of expectations. Shedeur Sanders arrived in Cleveland already carrying more weight than most first-year quarterbacks ever have to carry. Every throw he made in camp was measured against his last name before it was measured against his talent. Every mistake trended online before he even reached the sideline. That's the reality of being Deion Sanders' son in a league that never stops watching and rarely offers grace to a rookie batch. And it wasn't only inside the building. Inside the building, the Browns had built one of the most crowded quarterback rooms in recent memory. A returning veteran, a rookie taken earlier in the draft, and Shedeur fighting for reps, fighting for trust, fighting to feel like the locker actually belonged to him. When a franchise stacks that many arms in one room, it sends a message whether the front office means to or not. The message is simple. Nothing is guaranteed. Not the starting job, not the backup spot, not even a soft landing.
Quarterback will be entering his 19th season in the NFL this year with the Cincinnati Bengals, returning for his second year with the Bengals after he was traded midway through the 2025 season by the Cleveland Browns. Okay, here it says Flacco had entered the year as a starting quarterback for the Browns after returning to the team following a one-year stint with the Indianapolis Colts. Flacco re-signed with the Browns last offseason with the understanding that the
environment Shedeur stepped into. No welcome mat, no easy runway, just competition. Every single day in practice reps, the public never sees, but that quietly decide everything. So when word got out that veteran quarterback Joe Flacco was finally ready to speak on what that quarterback room actually felt like from the inside, people paid attention. Because Flacco isn't some analyst guessing from a studio desk. He lived it. He sat in those meetings. He watched Shedeur up close, under real pressure, not the highlight reel kind. And what he said wasn't what people expected. Flacco didn't rip into the kid. He didn't feed the outside narrative that painted Shedeur as an overhyped name riding his father's shadow. Instead, he described something almost ordinary, a quarterback room competing hard while still respecting one another, guys pushing each other to get better instead of tearing each other down. He even admitted the dynamic felt a little different because of the age gap, him being the veteran in a room full of players young enough to belong to a completely different football generation. But he made it clear that gap faded fast once everyone settled into the grind together. That's not the story social media wanted. Social media wanted chaos. Social media wanted a villain. Instead, they got a 14-year veteran calmly saying the room worked exactly the way a competitive quarterback room is supposed to work. Take a second and think about what that actually means. A man who has played in nearly every kind of quarterback room the NFL has to offer looked at Shedeur and saw professionalism, not entitlement, saw competitiveness, not arrogance. That's not a small thing. That's the kind of quiet endorsement that carries real weight in league circles, even if it never trends the way the drama does.
Okay, here's what Flacco had to say. He said, everybody's curious about that. I mean, listen, it was a quarterback room. It was no different than any other quarterback room I've been a part of. I usually have good relationships with those guys, and this was no other. This was no different than that. It was a group of guys kind of working towards a common goal, but at the same time competing and trying to make each other better and trying to.
The coaching staff itself was under just as much scrutiny as the rookie quarterback, a brand new head coach, 60 years old, first time running his own team, and almost immediately the questions started. Is he too old to relate to this locker room? Is he too inexperienced at the top job to manage a roster this young and this hungry? Then someone who actually played for him stepped forward. Someone with credibility, someone with nothing to gain by sugarcoating it, and what he revealed changed the temperature of the entire conversation. He didn't talk about wins or losses, he talked about belief. He talked about a coach who had spent years developing wide receivers who became stars, guys who trusted him not because of a scheme on a whiteboard, but because of how he treated them behind closed doors. He described a coaching style built on trust, delegation, and letting talented assistants do their jobs instead of micromanaging every decision. And then he said something that stuck with people. Players are willing to run through a wall for a coach who gives them something real to believe in. Suddenly, the age question didn't feel like a weakness anymore. It felt like experience finally getting its shot. And that's exactly the environment Shedeur is stepping into. Not a coach obsessed with control, a coach who has spent decades building trust with young playmakers, the same kind of trust that could define whether Shedeur becomes the guy this franchise builds around for the next 10 years, or just another name in a long line of quarterback experiments in Cleveland.
And then he spoke on, so he pretty much just said, It was typical standard stuff in terms of the quarterback room and the quarterback competition, even with the dynamic of having two rookies and you know they are there to take your job. But he said, basically the dynamic wasn't too messed up. But outside of that, Joe Flacco, he has had pretty much nothing but good things to say about Shedeur Sanders, which is nice.
Here's where you have to pause and really sit with the tension of this story, because that's exactly what it is, tension. On one side, doubt, a veteran quarterback ahead of him on paper, a front office that stacked the room instead of clearing a path, a fan base conditioned by years of quarterback disappointment to expect the worst before they allow themselves to hope. On the other side, belief, a head coach with a track record of turning raw talent into stars, teammates who speak about Shedeur's demeanor, not his ego, a locker room that, according to the people actually inside it, never turned toxic the way outsiders assumed it would. That push and pull, criticism against belief, is the entire story of Shedeur Sanders right now. And if you're new here, this is exactly the kind of story we dig into every single week, the real layers behind the headlines, not just the noise. So if you want to stay locked in on where this goes next, go ahead and hit subscribe right now, because this story is far from finished. Now let's talk about who Shedeur actually is in that building, away from the cameras. People who've spent real time around him describe someone who doesn't flinch under pressure, someone who was raised inside football long before he ever put on an NFL jersey. That upbringing gave him something you can't coach, poise, the kind of poise that lets a rookie sit in a quarterback room next to a 19-year veteran and not feel small. That mindset showed up in small moments during camp, moments that never made SportsCenter but mattered to the people watching closely. Extra reps after practice ended, film sessions that ran longer than they needed to, a willingness to ask questions instead of pretending to already know the answers. None of that guarantees success in this league, but it tells you something about how seriously he's treating the opportunity. Then there were the flashes on the field, the kind of throws that make a quarterback room go quiet for a second, anticipation throws into tight windows, touch passes that dropped in over a defender's shoulder like they were placed there by hand. Nothing that rewrote the record books, but enough to remind everyone why he was worth the gamble in the first place. And every one of those flashes came wrapped in scrutiny, because that's the deal when your last name is Sanders. A good practice throw gets clipped and shared 1,000 times. A bad one gets dissected for hours by people who've never stepped on an NFL practice field in their life. That's the weight he carries that other rookies simply don't.
Down this Todd Monken situation with Shedeur Sanders. Let's get into it.
I'll tell you right now, I was already fired up, but I'm even more fired up after Cecil came on and reiterated some of the points that he has already shared with me. And, for whatever reason, it slipped my mind of the wide receiver coach background when it comes to Todd Monken. And yeah, it does make sense. He did have a guy like Mike Evans who, he helped craft him. And
Public reactions split right down the middle the way it always does with him. Half the football world ready to crown him the moment he strings together a few good throws. The other half ready to write him off the moment he has a rough series. There's rarely a middle ground when it comes to Shedeur Sanders, and that in itself says something about how much attention this story commands. Then came the turning point. Not one single explosive moment, but a shift in tone. Teammates speaking up unprompted, a head coach publicly backing his development, a veteran quarterback, someone with nothing left to prove and nothing to gain from lying, going out of his way to say the room worked, that Shedeur fit right in, that the dynamic never became the disaster outsiders assumed it would be. Slowly, the narrative started tilting away from spectacle and towards substance. That doesn't mean the questions disappear. It means they evolve. Instead of asking whether he belongs in that quarterback room, people started asking what his role looks like moving forward. Instead of asking whether the pressure would break him, people started asking how far his ceiling actually goes if that pressure keeps shaping him instead of shrinking him. Because that's the real story underneath all the headlines. Pressure doesn't only break people, sometimes it builds them. And everyone around this Browns building right now, from the head coach to his own teammates, seems to be betting on the second version of that story. Looking ahead, Cleveland's plan feels less like a short-term experiment and more like a long-term investment. A coaching staff built on player development, a quarterback room that, according to the people who actually lived inside it, never turned into the toxic mess the outside world expected, and a young player who has already shown he can handle pressure that would break most rookies before their first regular season snap. None of that guarantees a Super Bowl. None of that erases the very real questions still surrounding this roster. But it does something just as important. It reframes the conversation. Instead of asking whether Shedeur Sanders belongs in the NFL, more people are starting to ask a very different question. What does he become if this coaching staff, this locker room, and this level of belief stay wrapped around him for years, not just months? That's the story worth watching. Not the noise, not the headlines built for clicks, the quiet, steady building of something real, one practice rep at a time, one veteran's honest word at a time, one coach's belief at a time. Because underneath every bit of outside criticism, there's a young quarterback still writing his own chapter, one throw, one film session, one hard conversation at a time, refusing to let the noise decide who he becomes.